Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And joining us today is a very successful prize-winning author. Her name is Jennifer Haigh, and the title of her latest novel is The Condition, and it's published by Harper, not Harper and Row, not HarperCollins, but Harper. That's because HarperCollins has developed so many imprints they don't know what to tell you. You know, we usually begin, or we usually end or frequently end with, buy this book today. I'd like to begin this interview a little differently. I'd like to throw some praising words out right at the start. This book is powerful, and it's captivating, and it'll take you to another world, to another family, and their achievements and their failures, and it'll do it in such a fascinating way that I suggest that you not start it too late in the evening, because you will miss a lot of sleep. The book, however, all begins simply enough. There's a family gathering on Cape Cod in a place called the Captain's House. And this reunion is almost idyllic. Tell us what's going on.
Well, this is the annual family vacation for the McCotches. It's Paulette and Frank McCotch and their 3 children, who are 9, 12, and 14. They spend a part of every summer together with their extended family. And this year is unusual because Frank McCotch, the children's father, notices something very unusual about his middle child,
Gwen.
Just a
minute. McCotch does not sound at all Cape Coddish to me.
Oh, it's not.
Yes.
It's not.
What is the family name that's Cape Coddish?
Drew.
Drew, okay. All right. So there they are, the McCotches. Unfortunate change of name, I think. Are all gathered in this cottage.
Yes.
Or cabin, yes. And something happens there that disturbs the tranquility?
Yes. Frank McCotch notices that his daughter Gwen is very much smaller than her cousins of the same age. She looks very small and physically underdeveloped for almost 13 years old. And he realizes at the time that something is wrong with her growth. And we find out in short order that she has a condition called Turner's syndrome. And this is in part where the title of the novel comes from. Turner syndrome is a chromosomal glitch. It happens just to girls. And essentially this means that a girl will never go through puberty. She never achieves her adult height. She never achieves an adult body shape. And this is what happens to Gwen. There's
a mention in the press materials, I think. I don't think this is in the book itself, that in a way the other members of this family also have conditions, which
yes.
is an interesting suggestion, I think, and interesting in 2 respects. That it helps because it does not push Gwen so far out, of the ordinary, so to speak. That we all have things that we have to deal with, and that we are going to hear things about these other people in the family that are perhaps equally or even more disturbing than what Gwen is going through.
Well, this isn't a novel just about Gwen. It's about all 5 members of the family in equal part. They all get equal time on the page. This is a story about a family that has never learned how to talk to each other. Gwen's condition gets a lot of attention in the family because it's the one you can't ignore. It's physical. It's obvious. These things that the other family members are struggling with are a little easier to hide.
Well, let's talk about some of those other ones. Billy, the eldest son, is a handsome Manhattan cardiologist who's hiding who he truly is from his family. He has a brother, Scott, who's mired in an unhappy marriage and with what are marvelously called here in your interview, limited career opportunities. He's not much good at anything. And then there is Gwen, whom we've talked about. But over them all is Paulette, proud member of the Drew family. And Frank, the man she married, it's almost not understandable to me why she married him. He comes from the rough hills, the coal mining hills around Pittsburgh, doesn't he?
Yes.
Koch, and it's an amazing thing to me that they ever got together.
Well, it's amazing on both ends. It's fairly astonishing that he ever married her in a certain way. These are two people who are so completely incompatible that it's remarkable they've managed to stay married as long as they have. And that becomes clear in the very first chapter, that they have different values. They don't want the same things in life at all.
The wonderful thing about The Condition is that you just don't learn about these characters, and you don't just learn about what's going on with them. You actually experience it.
Yeah.
The Condition, a novel worth reading and continuing to talk about, which we will in a minute or two.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. Jennifer Haigh is our guest today. Her new book is called The Condition, and the wonderful people at Harper's had the good sense to publish it. A gentleman by the name of Tom Perrotta, who's a New York Times bestselling author, it says here, has some nice things to say about it. For example, the ailment at the center of this remarkable novel is the human condition itself, which we were trying to get to in the first segment. Jennifer Haigh has written a sprawling, emotionally gripping account of one family's troubled history, enlivened by her formidable intelligence and deep insight into her characters' hearts and minds. Now, one of the reasons The Condition is so rich, it seems to me, is that you make it or you tell it like a Rashomon story.
Right. And for me, that's part of what's interesting. Anybody who's a member of a family has had this experience where you're sitting around the Thanksgiving dinner table and you talk about something that happened in the past, and no two members of the family remember it in the same way. And that's this book all over. Particularly if you send
some of them out of the room.
Right.
No, that's true. That's the way life is lived, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah, and you really see it in this novel because no two members of this family remember anything in the past in the same way. There's such a gulf in between their memories, and that's what you get to see in the novel. It's an exercise in point of view where you spend some time in each character's head, and because this is a family that doesn't talk to each other very much, you know more about the family than any single member of the family does. You know all their secrets.
Well, the reason they don't talk to each other very much, I mean, the good reason, if you will, is that they've gone off through different places and driven by a divorce between Frank and Paulette. And one of the things that these characters perhaps could never agree about is why Frank and Paulette got divorced in the first place.
Sure, even Frank and Paulette don't agree about that.
It sounds like an American family,
right.
I know. Oh, dear, dear. Now, one of the major things that goes on in the novel, and one would expect this to happen, is that Paulette, the mother, has a very protective way of raising Gwen. And she sees it as the way to do it, that she's helping Gwen, and Gwen doesn't see it that way.
Absolutely. And this has everything to do with why Gwen has very little relationship with her mother as an adult. Part of the problem is that Paulette always treated Gwen according to her size rather than according to her age. It's kind of a classic mistake of parents of kids with Turner syndrome. Mm-hmm. We see Gwen as a teenager, 17, 18 years old, still being treated very much as a child by her mother, and Paulette never breaks this habit. So Gwen at 35,
it isn't just her mom. I mean, there's this marvelous scene at the airport, I guess, in Boston, where she's trying to rent a car with her father there, and the guy at the counter is saying, "Where's the driver?" Mm-hmm. And she's saying, "Here I am." What a horrible situation that is.
Yeah, and this is something that the Gwen character lives with every day. There's such a disconnect between the person she is inside and the way she appears to the world. I mean, she is intellectually, emotionally a grown woman, but to other people, she's very small, and her whole appearance is confusing to them.
giving the reader the all-seeing view of what's going on is certainly one of the great benefits of this Rashomon approach. I think another benefit is that you can offer a sympathetic view of a character overall who at first seems unsympathetic. And I have in mind Scott, for whom I think you have a special fondness.
I'm very fond of all of them, and it's interesting to talk to people who've read the book because people have favorites among the characters and characters they find very exasperating. I have infinite sympathy for all of these people, and this always happens to me when I'm writing a novel. I never write a villain because I understand why these people do as they do.
Mm-hmm. Now, Scott actually at one point plays a rather heroic role.
In his own mind, anyway. He thinks of himself as a hero in this situation. Others might differ. Well,
there's a very funny visual about him. This extremely large billboard at a crossroads in Massachusetts or Connecticut, in which he's recommending that people go to this school that he's teaching at, a school that he doesn't want to teach at. Tell us about that.
It's our first look at Scott as an adult, and you see what an underachiever he is in a family of overachievers.
Yes,
he's teaching at this really substandard third-rate prep school, and because he's sort of a good-looking guy, he's ended up being a pitchman for this bad school.
Yeah, his hair is tousled, and it's something that was taken of him when he was out on the soccer field doing a totally miserable job of coaching, I think, the team won one game. Well, the condition is beautifully written, and when we come back, we're going to prove that.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. We're talking today about The Condition, a new novel by Jennifer Haigh, who's been kind enough to stop by, and a gentleman by the name of, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Andre
Dubus.
Andre Dubus has said some wonderful things about your book with humor, grace, and an abiding compassion that is becoming her signature. Jennifer Haigh illuminates the dark tangle of desire and deed that is the family, that crucible we so often yearn to return, we so often yearn to flee, yet keep coming back to again and again. The Condition is unsentimental, compelling, and moving. I agree with all of that. Wonderful book. Now, I want to return the idea of returning to that crucible, that sense of return. It seems to me is constantly in this book caused by Paulette. It seems to me that if she has any purpose as she grows old, and she worries very much about whether she has any purpose as she grows old. If she has any purpose, I think it's somehow holding the family together.
She certainly does her best, and this is not a family that really wants to be held together, so it's an uphill climb for her. Paulette is a person who clings desperately to the past. That's sort of been the guiding principle in her whole life. And it's been particularly hard for her as her children get older. It's a pretty common situation, women who've built their whole lives around a family, only to have that family kind of disintegrate.
One of the other things that she represents, I think, is something that unfortunately is common to many mothers and fathers as the children grow old, looking back and saying, did I do it right? Did I do it right? She wondered later, it says, if this had been the right impulse. Yes, she wanted to protect Gwen from any stigma. Yes, she had the child's welfare at heart, but there was more to it, just as there was more to Turner's syndrome than simply being short. The other aspects of the condition, the sexual ones, had mortified her. Was she to tell her father, her brother, that Gwen would never go through puberty? Nothing in her entire life had prepared her for such a conversation. In the Drew family, nobody went through puberty. Such matters were not discussed. Mortally embarrassed, she had avoided the whole subject. The family could see for themselves what was happening to Gwen or not happening. And there's a point in the book where you talk about Gwen's moment when she's supposed to go into puberty, and the problem was not what happened, the fact that nothing happened. And cowardly perhaps, but it had seemed to Paulette the best course. And even now, more than 20 years later, she couldn't say with certainty that she'd been wrong. That's what aging parents live with, this whole sense of doubt. Did I do it right? Did I do it wrong? It's a horrible business.
I think for Paulette, it's particularly acute because this was not the child that she expected to get. You know, she's put a lot of her energy into raising the daughter she expected to have. And as often happens in parenthood, the kid you get is not the one you planned for. No. And Gwen is not the daughter she planned for. So she has felt herself ill-equipped the whole way through.
I think it's a total rarity if you get the one you planned for. Just take what you get and have as much fun as you can. There are a lot of failures presented in this story. But there's also what I would call the triumph of Gwen. Do you see her life as it's played out here as a triumph?
I do, and I think that every one of these characters does grow in the course of the story, and Gwen in particular grows. Her life changes dramatically from page 1 to the end. And I'm glad for her. It's not for any of these characters, a completely happy ending. It's not without its problems, but they all grow enormously. And I think Gwen is much happier at the end of the book than she is early on.
One of the things she can do at the end that she was reluctant to do at the beginning and in the middle is talk. She would rather say nothing or very cryptic answers. She would go home to visit and talk about her cockamamie job in Pittsburgh, which would, make her mother angry. I mean, she knew she was telling her nothing. But at the end, she's a very different kind of person.
I think they all are. And part of it is learning how to talk to each other to some degree. It's something this family gets much better at because they're forced to.
Yeah. One of the saddest lines are written about Frank. For most of his life, he evaded it with sprints and deaths and pivots. That's melancholy he's avoiding. Like the gifted quarterback he'd once been. Now, with old age looming, his fancy moves had abandoned him. That's Frank toward the end. Paulette, toward the end, is still trying to have yet another reunion. And whether Paulette pulls that off or not, and how well it goes, that's something you folks out there will have to find out for yourself when you buy a copy of The Condition, written by Jennifer Haigh. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.